Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, May 31st, 2018. Hi again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani back inside our New York City studio. It's very crowded up here. I'm not used to having 4 people on the set. We're all like, bumping into each other and everything like that. But it is very exciting because we have 4 people on the set today. How great. And we have a lot to discuss, so let's get right into it. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMA Fighting. That is Danny Segura of MMA Fighting. And, of course, that is the man in the hat, the anchor, Chuck Mindenhall of MMA Fighting and The Ringer, owner, by the way, of 4 burner accounts himself.
Current ones, yes.
Yes. Oh, you had some other ones that you deactivated, see?
At my height, I had 12 more.
Wow. Amazing. We'll talk about that after the beat. That's when things get really freaky. Guys, let's talk first about the count. Michael Bisping, he has officially retired. And, it's funny, a few months ago we were talking about, okay, retirement fight, should he come back on the London card, maybe Liverpool, maybe International Fight Week. We had all these different scenarios that we played out. In the end, he retires on a Memorial Day Monday. The podcast comes out while most of England is sleeping. He does it with his podcast partner, Luis J. Gomez, and it just kind of came out there. It was like an 8-minute clip, and that's it. This Hall of Fame career comes to an end. I'm wondering, in combat sports, we love to have the retirement fight, the big send-off and things like that. Are you guys okay with someone of his stature saying goodbye this way? Are you at peace with all this? Do you feel like he did it the best way?
You mean like through the podcast?
Well, just, here we are 2 days prior, or 1 day prior, Liverpool, he could have come out, made a big announcement, something like that. If you listen to what he said, he was on a plane, he watched a movie, he had this epiphany. It's not for us to criticize the way he says goodbye, because, it's his career, it's his life.
Yeah.
But did you feel like he sort of maximized it, or maybe even he should have maximized? Retirements are a big deal.
I don't know. I don't think that he's lost the opportunity to do something big about it, either at some inevitable Hall of Fame induction, which seems like a foregone conclusion, or they could do it at any point in the future. They could do it on the broadcast of UFC 225, to be quite honest with you, if they really wanted to. Chicago wouldn't obviously be the ideal place necessarily, but a big audience is an ideal place, and they could do it there. I don't take much issue with it. I think when these guys wrestle with these decisions where, yeah, I'm out the game unless there's a big fight, and then they come around to some kind of conclusion that, no, I really am done. I understand your question, but for me, like, that he was able to finally, close that door to his career is such a momentous thing.
Yeah.
It's so important that it's almost like one of these delicate balances you don't want to disrupt. It's done, let it be done, and let's sort of see what moves on. I would like the UFC to do something for him.
Would be nice.
Would be nice, but in the end, I have no issues with it.
I guess I kind of wish that it happened the day before, only to get that scene of him walking out in front of his own people, saying goodbye. That's something that we don't usually see, and I feel like he deserved a send-off like that. I guess that's my point. Do you believe him? Do you believe that this is it? Retirements in MMA don't usually last in combat sports. So a lot of people say, oh yeah, he'll show up, in Bellator in 2 to 3 years. Do you actually believe that this is it for Michael Bisping?
I think so. I mean, Michael Bisping has always been very honest with the media. He's always been, said what he felt. And just the way he described his retirement, it wasn't like, oh, yeah, I think, the years have passed me, I'm going to retire. He talked about his eye and how scary that was. He already has a bad eye, and then his other eye, his right eye, is starting to give him some issues. And that's scary. You can have bad knees, you can have bad joints, and you can go on with your life, living those, obviously, like a lot of athletes, go through that. But once you start dealing with the eyes, you can't replace the eyes, and that's pretty dangerous. And I think he values his health. He knows that, it's obviously very important. And I don't think he'll take another fight. I really don't see him coming back.
He's just been a family man the whole way. I mean, just going back, even when everybody considered him the biggest heel in the game, basically, he was still very all about his girlfriend at the time, his father. He would talk about the people around him that were close. I just think that it seemed very definitive. Like, maybe the platform, I would have actually preferred, I guess, that he did it more in the spotlight like that. But at the same time, I think he did have it. It was very definitive. He's like, you know what? I'm done. It just occurred to him, and he was going to go talk about it on his show. I thought you look back at a couple of things, you think, I wish in some way that he had planned it a little better. And I know it was, because if you recall, right before he fought GSP, he was like, I'm not going to go fight Whitaker overseas. I'm not taking the long flights and all this. He ends up losing, and he wants to rectify or forget about it, or however he's dealing with it. He takes the fight, 3 weeks later in China. And I'm like, that's kind of the only sour note to this whole thing. Is just it's like, you didn't have to do that. But then again, if that contributed to his being definitive that he's going to be done and all that, I guess it all comes out for the same reason. But I had no problem with him doing it ultimately the way he did it. But I believe him, and I think he'll stay retired.
Also, as you know, I mean, in combat sports, people stick around for 3, 4, 5.
A lot of times, yeah.
Too many fights. So in the end, you could say maybe he stuck around for one fight too long, which actually is a victory, right?
You posted a picture for your chat where he's like just streaming blood, and it just looks like a hatchet came down on him. I can remember we were watching those fights, Anderson Silva, and a couple of those ones where he just gets smashed.
Second Henderson fight?
Yes, the second Henderson fight. And you would think, like, I don't want to see him do this anymore. That was the feeling I was getting. So you could actually go back a little further and be like, man, I felt like he could have got out earlier and not taken all that damage. But obviously it plays into his mentality and who he is that he went through all that. He communicates exactly what's in his chest. You know what I mean? Like that's his style of fighting. And I mean, that's kind of going to be his legacy. I don't know if you're going to get into that a little bit, but that's ultimately going to be his legacy, is that kind of thing.
Also, I think that he kind of made a calculation there. If you listen to what everybody says, you look at the math, the best way to make money in the game, we'll see what Conor McGregor does going forward, but let's discount him for just a moment, is to be a champion. That really is where all the money is. You need to be a champion or in that kind of fight for that to matter. He lost that belt, and yeah, he still made a pretty decent wage, but if you're not going to be a champion, you have to get one of those Diaz fights. That looked like that was never really going to materialize. I know they wanted Rashad Evans in London, and that didn't materialize. So what was he really holding on to? He had made as much money in the game as he was probably going to make. He had achieved as much as he was probably going to, and his eyesight was going. It was time, man.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about his career arc? Like, I feel like on Tough, he was kind of viewed as the brash Englishman. He had the little feud with Matt Hamill, wins Tough, and I think people were kind of getting behind him. Then he has the Matt Hamill fight, where everyone thought he lost, and they didn't like the way he celebrated, and that kind of began his run as a bad guy. And then, of course, I think, he got a little older, people started to enjoy him. Luke Rockhold, people love him, right? What an unbelievable story, underdog. And then people got annoyed with him as champion because they thought that he was. And then now,
like that the whole way.
Yeah, now you're showering him the praise. So it was kind of nice in the end. He leaves on this note where people are appreciating him.
I think the bottom line was there was always respectability with him. I think everybody respected him from the word go. It's just he made it very easy to hate him at times. Remember the whole Jorge Rivera spitting in the corner, things like that. I mean, I believe that was the lowest point.
That was
it was people wanted, everybody was calling him out. Everybody wanted to fight him. Fans couldn't stand him. And then it was like when we were at UFC 186, he was getting ready to fight Dalloway, I believe it was. It was almost like you could tell that he just all of a sudden was a very avuncular, like he was, talking to you like real warm and like, I've been in the fight game a long time. It's just, you saw the switch, and then it seemed like a couple fights later, he gets the Rockhold one, and I mean, you could see the switch. It was like all of a sudden people respected him and liking him again. It's been very, very interesting, but I think it's because people respected him no matter, regardless of people were hating him or liking him. I feel like that respect factor was in there.
One small detail, I remember when Nick Newell came back, maybe he said this to you as well. He told me when he came back out of retirement and he saw all these nice messages, he said he was surprised. He was like, I didn't know people liked me like this. And you saw Michael Bisping say the exact same thing. Yeah. He was like, I didn't know I was going to get... And to me, it's sort of crazy that they would think that. Like, of course people would be... But they've got some kind of weird under-the-gun mentality that turns them into something that I think Bisping kind of... Still in surprise, worked through.
There's times when, like, an NFL player has been the nemesis of your team or something for a long time, for 12 years or something, and then they retire. You hated them the whole way, but there's something about, like, oh, that's the end of an era, though. There's something bittersweet about that. So even if you hated him, I think he still represented so much, across the board that you can't help but kind of, give him a salute, at the end there. Regardless of what kind of salute that might be.
Athletes, unlike...
a single finger salute?
Unlike us, athletes get to almost... They get to see what it's like when they die, in a sense, because everyone kind of gets a little nostalgic about their departure. So, like if we, move on to something else, it's not quite the same, but I think everyone is showering them with praise.
Definitely not the same.
Well, people are either celebrating, I guess, maybe, or
No, I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, but you know what's amazing?
But they become something different. That's the thing. Like, we may just move on to a new occupational, same thing. They have to say goodbye to a part of their life. Yeah. And so there is something buried there.
Absolutely. The vital thing in their life,
It's funny that you brought up UFC 186 because I remember that was the fight right after the first Luke Rockhold fight when he was submitted first time in his career, and it seemed like maybe that was his best chance. Like he's just. It felt like his destiny was not just best fighter to never win a UFC title, best fighter to never fight for a UFC title, which was kind of, you know, that's not something that you want to own up to, but it just seemed like he was always going to lose that big fight before the big fight. And I remember I was supposed to do a sit-down interview with Demetrius Johnson in Montreal, and Demetrius Johnson told me that just a couple hours before that he had food poisoning. He was not feeling well, so he canceled. I was bummed. He was fighting Horiguchi in the main event. And so I was looking at the card, and it wasn't a very good card. Remember, that was the card that Rampage was in, and then he was out, and then he was back in against Maldonado. And I was like, you know, Bisping's old, reliable. He's just coming off this loss. Let's talk to him. And I remember him laying out a scenario. I'm going to beat CB Dalloway, and he was an afterthought on that card. Like, he was not one of the big draws. And then I'm going to come back, win a couple, and then I'll win the belt. And I remember sitting there looking at him, messed up eye and all, and saying, like, this is kind of sad. This is a delusional fighter right now. Like, there's no chance that this is actually going to come to fruition. And a year later, it actually came to fruition.
That's crazy.
Insane, right?
And I remember even writing it around that time, making the joke like in a headline, like the penultimate fighter. Because it was like he was always going to get close, but he was not going to get the actual thing. And he had won the Ultimate Fighter back in the day, and that seemed like it was going to be maybe the one thing that we'd remember him for. But I completely remember him talking like that in Montreal. So it's a tribute to him that he actually pulled that off. That was probably one of the most unlikely scenarios possible.
Yeah, probably one of the best words you could use to describe him is just persistence. Just the persistence he had. He was in 2 fights that were actually labeled title eliminator bouts. I mean, you don't see that around too often. And the fact that he lost both of those and then yet he still came back and won the belt, that in itself is amazing. And, you know, he kind of puts in light how we see losses in MMA. Like, you know, we were talking about not too long ago, like Raquel Pennington, she suffered all those damage, and a lot of it was like, oh, maybe she might not get a shot again. Well, losses are really just as much as you make them to be. Like, if you look at Ronda Rousey, like, she made her losses the biggest in the world. It ended her career. Michael Bisping never did that. He lost, and he got back on the horse and kept trying.
So what do you think his legacy is? How will he be remembered? Because I was actually worried for a while post-Rockhold that he will be remembered as, there were people calling him the worst champion of all time, right? There were people very upset that he wasn't defending the belt, that he picked Dan Henderson. It feels like that has all gone away very quickly. A bit surprising.
There's other champions that are kind of overshadowing
Maybe, because there's so many. What is Bisping's legacy?
I don't know if this is the appropriate, exactly. It doesn't mean the same thing in baseball as it will mean for him, but there is a bit of an overlap. To me, he's kind of like MMA's Charlie Hustle in a way, which is something, and what I mean by that is, I was looking up, like, this is a bit of a separate discussion, but it's illuminating just the same, which is, what are some of the criteria that enable somebody to get, let's say, into the Major League, or not the Major League Baseball, but the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's not part of the Major League. And it's more an eligibility issue than it is criteria. And one of those, of course, is that there has to be like 5 years after your retirement. And the other one, though, is you have to have 10 years straight in the league. And so one thing that sort of stands out to me about Bisping is just his longevity. My God, you look at his most significant strikes landed, most middleweight appearances, most wins, you know, second most fights, second all time in terms of total octagon time. I mean, this incredible longevity. And he did it in the trenches. My God, you look at his resume. Yes, he wasn't necessarily fight in, fight out fighting the #1 contender because he wasn't a champ, but he was fighting tough guys with no names and then very good guys with big names and then right back at it. And it was just every time, right up until the end, he had those 2 losses back to back. But in every other scenario, if he had any kind of a setback, he roared back to life. He got absolutely massacred by Dan Henderson, and then he came out and stopped Dennis Kang with strikes. He got dropped in the 3rd round by Anderson Silva, and in the 4th round, statistically, that was his best round by a mile. He just kept swinging the axe, and so to me, it doesn't mean the same thing as it does for Pete Rose, but my only point being is a guy who always, sometimes worked harder than he did smarter, to be quite honest with you, but put in maximum effort, maximum perseverance, just showed up every single day to get the job done, waited his turn, and boy, did he pay his dues in full. And by the time he was ready, it all just fell in his lap.
I'd love to see a bit of a sliding doors thing, because there is a very good chance, like I could see the scenario where he never gets that title shot. If Chris Weidman doesn't get injured 2.5 weeks before UFC 199, he's not getting the title shot. And if you'll recall, they actually went to Jacare first, and Jacare turned down the fight due to the short notice. Do you think we're sitting here right now, Bisping retires, never gets that title fight? What are we saying about him? Like, how those 2 weeks and what he did in that fight, obviously, you know, winning it changes everything. But are we? Because you could say the same thing about him right now. Like, you didn't mention the title victory in what you just said.
Right, but it's certainly.
Do you view him differently?
I do view him differently.
Okay.
I think he needed that achievement to really just give him that final push, because without it, he is MMA's sixth man or UFC's sixth
He's
man or
Patrick
something.
Ewing, he's Charles Barkley.
Right, he's
Right,
just
the guy.
he was right up on the line and not past it. And now that he got past it, because he was the first UK champion, to me that's such a big deal. He will always hold that. Even no matter how well the next British champion does, they can't be the spot that he occupied. That's really important.
It was important in that sense because you recall when Dan Hardy was at UFC 111 when he fought GSP.
Yeah.
So when that was happening, I remember there was just a lot of talk, and I was a lot of people asking, did you ever think that you would be the guy first fighting from the UK for a title ahead of Michael Bisping? Because it was like Michael Bisping had been around and he had some nice runs and he just wasn't there. UFC 100 was his last. There was a real sense that the whole way that he should have a title fight at some point. So if he never got that, I think it would have been some way it would have just, we would have still been talking about his longevity, bringing the lunch pail, all the things you're mentioning, but at the same time, I just don't think it would have, he wouldn't have become as special as he did. Because I think winning that, being able to come back from that UFC 186 moment, win the title, and avenge, I mean, you could look at the Henderson, you can put whatever asterisk you want, but that was a hell of a fight.
Yeah.
And he came back and he wins that fight. Pretty remarkable, man. And I'm glad it worked out for him in that sense, because it would have been very weird, wouldn't it? Like all those years and all those, there's so many times he was deserving, honestly, of a title shot. Just things weren't working out, and then you lose that penalty. So it's just one of the feel-good stories. You don't get a lot of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All the hard work that he put in, like the title was the payoff. The fact that he became the champion, we saw him hold the belt. It was especially so late into his career. So that was definitely nice. But even without the title, he accomplished so much that he still has a pretty big legacy. He was a pioneer for MMA in Europe. Not only that, but he was a guy that, I mean, this guy has been fighting for forever. This is a guy that stylistically, technically, he managed to stay relevant. We saw all those guys, of his age, sort of fade out by the newer guys. He stayed relevant, and he got wins, and he stayed the whole time a top contender, and I think that's pretty impressive. And outside of the cage, he also did the exact same thing. I mean, not to bash Tito Ortiz here, but if you look at his trash talk, it feels outdated. It feels old. And you can name a number of lists, a number of people like that. Michael Bisping always felt relevant. I mean, just not too long ago, some of the most heated and talked about trash talk involved him. Him and Yoel Romero, him and Luke Rockhold, and everybody, till this day, they're probably still calling him out, So he managed to stay relevant in every sense of the game, and I think
the whole way is stubborn, because I mean, even just never popping for anything, just not doing it, but the guys he loses to who have some red flags on their record and things like that. You just look at all that stuff and you think, like, man, how did he do that? How did he stay in there for as long as he did? And
it's amazing. He's coming off those 2 losses, but if that didn't happen, if the retirement didn't happen, I could see a scenario where Yoel Romero wins on June 9th, and all of a sudden, the fight that everyone wants to see is him versus Bisping, right? Like, it's not like he's irrelevant. It's not like he's so far removed from the title picture. I think, if you actually look at who's there for Romero, that's the fight that everyone wants to see. So you mentioned Romero kind of, it brought to, I was actually talking to someone close to Romero about that, how they're kind of sad that Bisping left, because that's Romero's money fight right now.
That's the biggest fight he could have.
Or even if Romero lost, that's a massive fight, that there's some real heat there that's been brewing for quite some time. I'm just really happy that all the people who are criticizing him as champion, that doesn't seem to be what is lingering right now.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that, he's going to get his place in the sun. Whatever the Hall of Fame means to you, he's going to be honored. He's going to be a part of the sport. It's times like this, though, that I kind of wish we had, like a boxing Hall of Fame where these people could be honored the right way and it can mean something. And I see people saying, like, oh, they should just put him in the Hall of Fame right now. I kind of like when we have some distance from it. Is that silly?
Every Hall of Fame does that.
Yeah.
Different time periods. I think NFL might be 3 versus baseball might be not NFL but football, and then baseball might be 5, and it can vary in between. But we even don't have a year, like nothing.
No,
Like,
Faber was just inducted.
Right. They're immediately, so you're swimming in this romanticism. It seems to me when you look at his resume, it's a pretty strong candidate.
Oh, come on.
But no,
pretty strong.
I would vote for him.
Yeah.
Yes, I would vote for him for sure. I'm just saying, you could make some arguments about the number of losses or whatever if you really want to be a contrarian. All in all, I do like I said it before. How much time did you spend in the big leagues, and time afterwards soberly assessing it?
So, favorite Michael Bisping memory moment? I feel like the easy one is the Rockhold fight. I feel like we need to exclude that, and maybe that's unfair. First one, yeah. Well, the way he handled it was, because they hated each other. That was a very tough loss to accept. Is it the Rockhold fight, or am I wrong? Is there another
I got
one?
a different one.
You
So
do?
connected,
Okay.
It's connected to it. I mentioned this, I think, on my live chat. So it was 6 years ago, not too long ago, 6 years ago. I think right around this time frame, he was on MMA Uncensored Live with me and Craig Harton and Nate Quarry. And that was when we were talking, that was still Strikeforce was around.
Okay.
And Rockhold was the middleweight Strikeforce champ. And that was when, so he came on the show and he was talking about Rockhold, and the exact wording I don't quite have down, but it was more or less, he's like, I've sparred Luke Rockhold in typical Bisping,
Yes.
in your face kind of stuff. He goes, let's just say I'm the the unofficial Strikeforce middleweight champ. Okay, but that wasn't it. So we go to break, and this was always like, if you just see Bisping from what you consume as a fan on media, you do have a sense of him, but there's also like a real human side to him too. You can get brief snippets of it. So we go to commercial, and he's like I am to you, so we're switching positions, and he sits there and he looks at me and he goes, I don't think I should have said that. And then he goes, oh well, and then just kind of smiled and laughed it off. He had a moment of clarity, like, that was kind of a dick thing to do. But in typical Bisping fashion, oh well, he just rolled the dice and went with it.
And that was the catalyst for the feud.
And that was one of the most important rivalries in his career.
No, but that was like they kept talking about that.
Set it in motion.
Yes.
Yeah, just that one moment.
It's amazing. I remember that vividly. What about you? Anything come to mind?
I wouldn't say like specific moment, but something that always got to me was at the weigh-ins when he'd get into his opponent's face, and he did this a number of times. This is a vintage Bisping move. He'd get on their face and he'd start pointing with his index finger and just sort of pacing back and forth and running his mouth. You couldn't really tell what he was saying, but that just hyped me up. And then his opponents were just there, kind of taking it, and you could see, their opponents sort of something brewing inside. And he always did that. I wish somebody put together a compilation of just weighing face-offs when he's getting in the face and he's doing his whole pointing.
If only we had someone who had a lot of footage of Michael Bisping weighing in.
I can think of a few people.
Yes. Those were great. I remember the one against Anderson Silva was awesome because no one really steps to Anderson like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. He didn't care.
London.
Yeah.
What about you, Chuck?
I just love that he was easy to not rattle, but he was easy to get under his skin, and he would just control himself. Like, you remember the Rivera puts out this video or whatever, and that whole thing, and it was funny to watch him just come unhinged, and I was like, it was kind of brilliant too, because I was like, this is a guy who, he's making people care about a fight that nobody would probably care about otherwise. You know what I mean? Like, I remember by him doing that, overreacting, and just getting the way he did, and remember the scuffle and I think it was like the weigh-ins or something like that. It just kind of brought some heat to the fight that it wouldn't have existed. And I was like, he was very good at that. That's just one moment that stands out. I had a personal one too. In Vegas one time I was eating out somewhere with a well-known chef who has a TV show, actually. This was but anyways, we're in Vegas.
You got to tell us his name.
yeah,
you can't like half name drop.
Anthony Bourdain.
Wow, look at
Yep.
you. Is Bourdain a chef? I thought he was just
He
like
was
a
a
host.
chef.
Oh, that was his thing.
So anyways,
Just
some
one-on-one?
fighters. No, there's a couple of us there. Jesse
you.
Katz from Roots Fight was there.
Wow.
But
Jesus Christ, are you a celebrity? We don't know.
no, Michael Bisping came in with a couple of other people, and they sat at a table, and we just naturally fell into conversation. I'd never really talked to him before. It was like one of the few times, and I realized because it was Bourdain, but they bring in around, they always bring around some free stuff. So they're bringing us like top shelf whiskeys and things like this, and he's sitting over here. So I'm like. Just sliding him over to Bisping, and he's just like, drinking him, and it was like having this great conversation. I realized what an aficionado he was with that sort of thing, and just how funny and personal he was, because it just kind of very casual for about half hour, 45 minutes, and it was like the first time I felt like I glimpsed him on a different level and understood who he was,
Yeah,
He was he bridged two eras, right? Because he was on the one hand a guy who, now I know when he became champion, some of the matchmaking got people a little riled up because he didn't take the Romero fight and things like that. But as I mentioned before, that's your one chance to make money, and he knew the clock was ticking. So we're not going to have that debate again. Only point is prior to all that, there could be no argument about his resume. He fought the very best of his generation, win or lose, and yet at the same time, he fits in perfectly in this modern era. If his body was fresh, he could do all of the media and the trash talking and the social media stuff. He'd be all on top of it. He'd have no problem sliding right in. It's just, his time is up.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like I really was getting bothered by the fact that there was this stigma being put on him that he was picking fights, because he never picked fights. Like he fought Vitor in Brazil. When everyone was like, Vitor in Brazil, this maybe not the right time for you to fight.
It was scary looking Vitor too.
Chael on short notice on that Fox card when it seemed like he was close to getting a title shot. So he was never that guy.
And he was supposed to lose the Rockhold fight the second
and
one.
you mentioned a couple of shows back or at some point that his self-belief was on another level. It really is. Like his self-belief was, I don't think it occurred to him the way it was occurring to us. Oh, you're going to go against Chael Sonnen at that moment? You know, that's a horrible matchup for you. What are you doing? Doesn't occur to him. You're going to go fight Vitor in Brazil. Look what's been happening. The guy's doing that. Doesn't occur to him. You know what I mean? So that's another part of his legacy is just like, you know, just kind of being defiant of perception that way.
Yeah, that's actually ties into one of my favorite moments. But there's so many I could pick. The first event that I ever covered was when he won Tough 3. I was there in Vegas. First event that I ever bought a ticket for as a fan was UFC 78 when he fought Rashad Evans in the main event in Newark. Was at a bunch of his fights. I was in Australia when he fought Rivera. That was a weird scene because of how hostile it was. I think my favorite moment was actually the week before the Rockhold fight. He was on the show via Skype, and he was so freaking confident. It was unbelievable. And the way he was speaking for that fight, and I was like, this is so crazy that he actually believes. Because remember, we all thought that Rockhold was going to become the best middleweight of all time.
And he blew
just
right through Bisping.
Wide. It was just, it made no sense. Remember he accepted the fight when he was on a movie set, and he said he went to run.
Huge at the moment.
He was seen drinking beer on courtside for a Toronto Raptors game just days prior.
Yeah, and he was just so freaking confident. I just love that. Being in London when he fought Anderson Silva, it felt to me, I remember watching him. It's very rare that I go cage side for a fight, but I wanted to be cage side for that one. And when he won the fight and he jumped on the cage and celebrated, it kind of felt like that was his title victory. Like it sort of felt like he's probably not going to get a title fight. At that point, we kind of knew about the damage to his eye and maybe that he was reaching the end. And it felt like, all right, if he's not going to get a title fight, at least he beat, the greatest middleweight champion of all time in his home, in his home country. This is pretty darn cool. And then, of course, he gets the Rockhold fight shortly thereafter. So there's so many, it's just, and of course, like how accessible he was to all of us. Who has ever had a bad interview with Michael Bisping?
You have to struggle.
Yeah, you have to really like piss him off. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he was a saint all the time.
Done that.
You pissed him off.
Yeah, of course. But like
But then he comes back. He doesn't take it personal.
Right.
He'll never blackball you,
He's a human being. He gets mad at you.
He doesn't
then
take
he's
it
fine.
personal. He's not going to hold a grudge. He'll never do he'll never do it like John Jones did. Or like hear something and be like, I'm not going to answer your question. He'll maybe give you shit for it publicly, but then you'll have a laugh about it.
He'll roast you for sure.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think we all appreciated that. So it was cool to see like all the fighters, even the Tim Kennedys of the world, right? Who despised him. Yeah, who gave him props. The Chris Weidmans of the world who, they never saw eye to eye. So it was very cool on that Monday, Tuesday.
Send him any nice notes?
I didn't check, but nothing came. I didn't see anything. But look, they had a great, they're 1-for-1. I know it's bitter for Rockhold right now. I'm just really happy that he is not taking that retirement fight. He doesn't need the retirement fight. He has done it all. He has said it all.
Those details about his eye were scary.
Yeah, and that's the bittersweet part. Like he doesn't. Of course, he's not leaving in a wheelchair, but you hope that he's able to have a productive life. And he's great on television. He's great on set. I think he would do great in the booth, so to speak, like for the actual fights. And then, of course, he has his podcast, his movies. So he seems to be set up. And I'll also miss a little underrated thing. I'll also miss the embeddeds. I don't watch Embedded as much these days because it seems a little stale, but I'll miss the Embeddeds, his interactions with his youngest son, Lucas, who always picks against him. Yes. You know that? That always kind of...
Or he's wrestling his other kid.
Yeah, he's wrestling his other kid. Yeah, it's great. By the way, Callum, I don't know if you guys follow him on Instagram, but that kid is jacked and a really good wrestler, which is kind of funny because his dad was always known as a weak wrestler. So maybe the American...
Not done with Bisping yet, just another version.
No, he's big. He makes you look like Nate Diaz.
Wow.
Who doesn't?
Yes.
Who doesn't?
All right, so there's Michael Bisping, and how interesting is it that he announces his retirement a day after Darren Till wins on his big stage in his home city against Wonder Boy main event. The parallels there are very interesting because it feels like Darren Till might be the next Michael Bisping. Let's just put it out there because it still feels like it's being debated. Who did you guys score that fight for?
Well, I had
Chuck.
So watching it intuitively, you're just you're not really paying attention too much. You're just going off of what you think is happening. And I remember after 3 rounds thinking that Thompson might be up 3-0. So I'm like, at this point, I'm thinking Till probably needs to come on, have some urgency here and try to get something done here because he may not win on the scorecards. with the caveat, obviously, that they're fighting in Liverpool, that there might be some sway in there. So the bottom line was, in the end, I was pretty convinced that Thompson would win 3-2. Obviously, the takedown and all that was pretty definitive, but I had it 3-2.
But the takedown was nothing.
I know.
Like he popped right.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just, I mean, there's the bottom line is I was, when I'm watching it, it seemed a little. I was not a robbery. Like these are the types of things that always drive me nuts. It's like some people are automatically saying like robbery. I'm like, that's not a robbery no matter what, because the rounds were so close. There was no definitive. It'd be one thing if Thompson had knocked him down in each of those first 3 rounds, and for some reason a couple of the judges gave, to Till. There was none of that. So I didn't really have a big problem with it. And you look at the stats, and I know you're not a big guy on the stats and all that stuff.
No, I am.
Okay.
But they're misused.
Yes.
That's the problem. People don't know how to use them properly.
Yes, correct. But so I know that, like, in the end, you look at all that stuff and you think, well, I could see the case for Till for sure. So it's like I didn't see it as a controversy, and I had no problem with it. But was one of the scorecards or 2 of the scorecards? The reading of the scorecards was confusing because when they said 49-46, right? I'm thinking there's no way that could be Till.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking Thompson won. My shock was really that those scorecards were that far in that favor.
Yeah. Who'd you score for?
I actually I scored it for Till. I think he took the first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
I think Thompson took the 3rd one. I think that was pretty clear. The 4th one was a bit difficult, but I gave it to Thompson. I had to rewatch it a couple of times, and then the 5th one I thought Till won it.
Easy call. He got dropped, right? So
Yeah. So Thompson did.
Yeah,
So,
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I had a 3-2 Till, but man, those rounds were close, especially the first 2, because there wasn't, the action seemed pretty even, but Till was pushing forward. So that's how I came down to the scoring, but it was a close fight. There's no way you can call it a robbery, and it could have gone either way. It obviously went to Till, and that's probably I don't know how much the crowd influenced Liverpool, but like it definitely had to have some sort of effect. I think Thompson makes a good point. If it was in South Carolina, maybe things would be different. But it is what it is, and I scored it for Till.
What are you going to say?
There were 9,000 people there in Liverpool. It sounded like 90.
Yeah, it was great.
It was crazy.
It was awesome. The walkout, tremendous.
And I don't even like Sweet Caroline. I think it's one of the worst songs ever written. But in that circumstance, it's just tremendous.
Have you ever heard Justin Timberlake perform it? It's phenomenal.
I would literally.
He wrote the lyrics.
I'm not kidding. I would rather be shot in the face with Ebola-infested urine than ever hear anything like that.
Go again.
In any case,
It's been a while since you pulled out one of those.
Well, I mean,
Only in extreme cases.
Yeah.
He's just drinking a bullet from
it's
the
like
cooler.
there is no greater indictment of the Red Sox franchise than they have ritualized this ear cancer. But whatever. Okay. What was the question? Oh, Till, how did I score it? Sorry, I just got off on a tangent. I don't know what happened to me. I got in the zone. I scored it for Thompson. I wasn't scoring it hardcore. I was sort of trying to just follow generally what the action was. And then when it ended, I was like, I don't know exactly how this is going to go, but Thompson should probably get 2 of the 3 scorecards. That was sort of how I did it. And then with you, and it was like 49-46. I was like, wow, okay, these judges. And then it went for Till, and I was like, I'm not sure I understand that. I think my major issue is, look, you go over some of the numbers on this one. People misuse stats. The way to think about stats in MMA is if I have a certain need in my garden, maybe I need a rake, maybe I need to do some jackhammering of the concrete, maybe I need a hammer. You have to find the right tool for the right kind of challenge. And what people end up doing is they just take aggregate arithmetic numbers and throw them against the wall and say, look what these say. But they don't say what you think they say. In 3 of the rounds, there was a 1-strike differential, and there was no way to qualitatively measure what they were. So the only real lesson I can infer there is I'm just going to count all those as even until you can visually inspect what it all matters. And when you've got, in the first round, it was 5 strikes to 4 that landed. You got 9 strikes total that landed. Yeah. It's one thing if you've got 25 to 20, where there's a lot to measure. You have nothing to measure.
Yeah.
It's going to be close. It's going to be bad. Yeah. The only problem for me was not that you came to a Till conclusion or that you came to a Thompson conclusion, is that we are this far into the game, and even smart, diligent fans don't know how a fight is scored. And I really think this is one of those things where I know that they're not going to change it. We're just stuck with the government bureaucracy. But this fight sort of illuminated to me that, like, we're this far into MMA. We have this foobarred system. Mm-hmm. It tells you that the compartmentalization that they do by round and then by categorization is so bad for MMA. It's really not a good
Are you guys a fan of open scoring?
I'm an open fan of. I'm a fan of trying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
fan
the
of
way I
trying.
would look at it too.
So for those that don't understand what that means, basically after every round, it would be broadcast to the audience at home and in the arena who's winning. So the fighters would know. It'd be like a scoreboard in any event.
Why should it be just guesswork? Because there's a part of you that's like, you think this is not how it is. And like,
Any sport, you know where you're at.
Drama too is in knowing the score. I mean, if you know a fight is tied at 1 going into the 3rd round, that's its own drama, right? I mean, and the fighters obviously. I mean, you could get into the particulars of it. Some people would claim that if a fighter's up 2-0, say in a 3-round fight, that they may coast or they may, do things. They would start to do that kind of thing. I don't know about all that, but the bottom line is I would like to see it experimented with because it just seems silly that we just leave it to guesswork. From a corner's perspective, like so many times the corners are wrong. Hey, you're up. Just keep doing what you're doing, and then they lose. I mean, you think that they would just from all the
flip side is people will say if you know that you're up 4 rounds to none going into the 5th, you're gonna take your foot off the gas.
That's what I'm saying. Like that would be the one criticism is they might, if a fighter knows he's up, he might be inclined to be like, well, now I just need to stay out of danger and coast through this, which would especially be a boring fight if you're up 3-0 in a 5-round fight, because then you're just like the championship rounds just become.
But is that any different than a team being up 21 points going into the 4th quarter of a football game? You're not as aggressive, right? There's no real difference.
You just run the ball the whole time.
Yeah.
My problem with comparing MMA to other sports like that, how we have open scoring and we see how much it's up, is that it's very clear. Like the scoring, you put a ball in the net, you get certain points, right? In soccer, football, say whatever it is. With MMA, there isn't like a clear thing that you do and you won the round, It's a collection of things that happen throughout the 5 minutes that sort of give you the chance to judge that round. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of.
But why would that be against it? I mean, because. Do you feel like the fighter might get worked up over the fact that he thought that he won?
I feel like maybe it can have, it can sway. I don't know. It maybe like the judges knowing each other's scores could maybe be problematic.
Yes.
If someone's judging, for example, there's fights that like somebody watching, they're like, oh, this guy clearly won, and then somebody else can think, have a different opinion. But the problem with that is that maybe, judges, especially some that are not too familiar with MMA, can start second guessing themselves. Wait, I really thought this guy won, but everybody else is scoring it for this guy.
You're not doing it like staggered. They're all coming out with the score at the same time, I would imagine.
No, but I think
Sure, but going, for example, let's say like somebody scored the first 2 rounds for Till.
Yeah.
And then you see the other 2 judges scoring it for Thompson. Then you going into a 3rd round. Am I looking at this right? Am I missing something?
So now you're trying to
And then
compensate.
all of a sudden you're trying to look at what Stephen Thompson is doing. Good to see if you're missing something, to see if you're not capturing something, and then the score can be swayed. Maybe if there's some sort of system or mechanism that you can sort of put the score out there. Everybody else knows the score, but the people actually judging the fight, they don't know each other's score. Again, that'd be something difficult to do.
The aggregate score you could do. Right? So heading into the 4th round, it's 30-27 or it's 29-28 X over Y. There's ways to. He is absolutely right, and no one ever talks about this, and I'm really glad he brought this up.
That he's right. No one talks about this.
No. The point. No. It was the point that he made. I think it's absolutely correct. Everyone talks about the judges would just put up their scores and how would it affect fighter behavior, and I'm open to arguments that it would have its positives and its negatives, and I'm willing to entertain all of those things. But the only one no one ever talks about until he brought it up is the fact that the judges might be changed by how they're scoring and how they read and interpret each other, and how would that affect then the fighters themselves when they are interpreting maybe which judge is actually putting up which score and which one do you want to impress? Do I want to attempt the takedown on that side of the cage versus this one? They can have a lot of externalities that we're not really accounting for. Here's my point. In every one of these scenarios, show me the person when we did early weigh-ins who was like, wow, this is going to really lead to an abrupt and massive increase in the number of failures. I didn't see anybody saying that. The point being,
universally praised.
It was universally praised, and I'm sure by everyone on this panel, because we all thought, wow, give fighters more time to rehydrate. This is great. My only point is, all of these things will affect human behavior and incentivize certain actions that we're not even aware of. It has to be tested, and it has to be tested extensively. That's what I'm in favor of.
Okay, so you bring up weigh-ins. Darren Till missed weight. He missed weight by 3.5 pounds, and he said afterwards that he would have given up 100% of his purse. In the end, he doesn't have to do that. He gives up 30% of his purse, and he also had to make 188 by 1 p.m. local time on fight day, so he couldn't, fully rehydrate. He actually had to cut some weight on the morning of because he got up to over 190. And it feels, at least to me in the aftermath, obviously it's talked about a little bit, but it doesn't feel like he's truly suffering. Like, in other words, it doesn't feel like there are serious repercussions for him missing weight for this very important fight, like it's going to stunt his growth, like it's the UFC not going to, they're not going to give him an opportunity that they would have given him had he missed weight. And of course, we live in an era where Yoel Romero missed weight in an interim title fight, and here he is, 2 weeks away from fighting for the belt. Do you feel like he should be punished in some way? I see people upset over the fact that he's now ranked number 2. Again, I don't know. I just don't think it's worth getting all worked up over those rankings. Do we feel like he should, basically, if I would have asked you, if Darren Till beats Wonderboy Thompson, what do you do with him? X. Now that he beat him but missed weight, what do you do with him? Is it Y as opposed to X both times? You get what I'm saying? Should there be a punishment?
I don't know what you guys are. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I know that there was.
Well, this is a first.
Yeah, well, mark it down. Every once in a while.
What show was this?
Sweet Carolina will hammer the world, but on this one, I think the point being is there has to be something. But this is another one of those scenarios where, like, no one has a really good answer for it, and in part because there's always this glacial, incremental experimentation with punishment rather than like sweeping attempts at some kind of new change. Yeah. So this idea Dan Hardy had about taking a point away, I don't know how much I love that, but why don't we try it and see what happens?
Now, what is that?
Where for every pound over, even the allowance, every pound over, you would lose a point in a fight.
Holy smokes.
I tend to think that would be a disaster because...
So he's going into the fight essentially at 30 to 27, like right off the bat.
I am merely relaying someone else's idea. Maybe that's
radical, but I guess maybe it would deter.
Or, if you're 3 pounds over, that counts as 1 point. I think you'd end up getting a lot of draws.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It would just result in draws.
Okay, but the people are trying to come up with ideas, and no one has found a satisfactory answer. My only answer is, the only thing I can say is if you miss by more than 2 pounds, it shouldn't even be a question. Like, what's Mackenzie Dern's next weight class going to be? Oh, we know. It should be 1 up. Yeah. Same thing for Till. He should have to take a fight. That when he missed by that much, I understand it was a bit of an accident for the extent
personal reasons.
You should have to go up no matter what.
So if you're the UFC, you're making him fight at 185 next?
Yeah, for sure. And I know that's inconvenient, but so is missing weight.
Do you think that he'll be punished for this in any way other than the 30%?
No, he's definitely not going to get punished. I mean, 30% was his punishment.
Get real, Ariel.
By the way, 30% of his entire purse, not just show money, which I think is notable as well.
But I do think, and you mentioned it in your live chat, I do think there should be, fighters should be forced to move up weight after missing weight. I think they should be allowed to miss once because there are circumstances out there that it can happen, crazy stuff that's out of your reach that can sort of halt you from making weight. And otherwise, other than that, you could be a professional that makes weight every single time. So I think maybe if you miss weight a second time, then you should.
This was the second time.
Okay, yeah. Then after this, he would be forced to move up a weight class, and then they would have to prove they could go back down, but they would have to. I don't know. There would have to be some sort of review or something.
What California does, the doctor, you have to demonstrate to a doctor, and the doctor has to say this weight class is appropriate for you.
And then you can go ahead and compete for that weight class. But yeah, I would say two strikes and you move up.
Welterweight is so interesting right now, and especially we have this interim title fight coming up. What would you do with Darren Till? What's the plan here? Because it seems like everyone has an opinion, and there's no real wrong answer, but it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with him next.
The top 10, you could pretty much put a plug against anybody. I mean, no Magny fight on the same card. That would be a fun fight, but I understand that Neil, he's already calling out
Usman.
Usman. I'm like, if that's the fight they want to make, that's okay. I don't know. There's a part of me, I know Masvidal's coming off of a couple of losses, but to me that would be a fun fight. Like if they're going to put that together, that would be a good fight. I would love to see the Lawler fight, but I think you mentioned earlier that he's going to be out of commission too long. So I mean, ultimately, I would love to see him fight Usman. I know before the Till fight, I was like, I don't want to see that fight right now, but I think now I do.
Till Usman.
Yes, Till Usman. I would love to see that fight.
I don't know. I don't really agree with that because I mean this was before Till fought Thompson. I said it on this panel. Like even if he wins, there's a good chance he might look bad out of that victory, just given the styles and given the performance that most people usually have against Wonderboy. And Till is such an exciting prospect. I think at this point, you rolled the dice, you took the gamble, you did win, right? I mean, Darren Till came out with the victory, huge prospect. Match him up against somebody fun. I think the Usman fight, it's much like the Thompson fight where he might win, but he could look, not so great in the process. And he's coming off this fight. I think, you're putting him against, two very tough guys, testing him, in two very different areas that both guys are really good at. So I think put him against a Santiago Ponzinibbio, put him against a Masvidal, put him against a Neil Magny, a fight that, it still challenges him, a fight that could go either way, but a fight that also promises excitement. This whole situation just points out how damaging interim belts are. I mean, RDA should have been fighting Woodley, and he should have been fighting Covington, and the winner of that would have been the clear #1 contender. Yep. But that's not the case. So I think for now, Darren Till, just came off a victory over Stephen Thompson. That's probably the biggest accolade he can get right now.
So then why go backwards?
So any other step right now, it has to be backwards. It's either Stephen Thompson or after that, it's fighting for the title.
Okay, so what about title?
He even said himself he doesn't deserve to fight for a title, and that he wants to beat all the C's. And whatever else, but I think it's a fair point. He missed weight. I think he understands it. I think he wants to show that even he, I think, wasn't quite satisfied with how everything turned out. From the weight missing to the fight complexion to the result being, it was a unanimous decision, but I think he expected more of himself. And I think he wants that same kind of post-Cerrone buzz to really then move forward. I agree. The Ponzinibbio fight would be great. Masvidal. This is.
I really like the Masvidal fight.
Masvidal is a great opponent for a lot of people.
Right.
But I said it months ago. You can look at my timeline. I think Usman versus Till is the way to go.
That's the one.
The Gorilla versus the Nigerian Nightmare. You got two different styles, two guys who I think still haven't shown everything that they've got. And I know you'd be, you're knocking off one contender for the other. There's a lot of contenders now. Let's see. Let's sort this out. And then the style contrast to me is a real big deal. I love that fight.
I like that fight. If my #1 choice would be Masvidal, if Covington loses to RDA, I really want to see Covington versus Usman because of their
great one too.
Their differences, especially at that press conference. I thought they were the most entertaining duo, and they're not even fighting each other. And so, I guess it depends on this bizarro interim fight. Again, I wish there was no interim fight because it does seem to be a bit of a monkey wrench, although it's happening in less than 2 weeks, so hopefully it gets sorted relatively quickly. But now here you have Woodley, who's chomping at the bit to come back.
So bizarre.
And what is he going to wait? Maybe if that fight goes quickly, the winner will turn around. But I agree, there's not really a bad choice here because he beat someone like Thompson. So anything else, you climb that mountain. It wasn't a robbery. It was super close. But Thompson fights everyone that way. He's a very hard guy to finish. It's damn near impossible. So if you go with Masvidal, if you go with Ponzinibbio, these are all...
You can't go wrong,
Yeah.
It is sort of interesting how Thompson, maybe this will change, but I don't detect that he's getting any kind of rep as a boring fighter, nor am I suggesting that would be a fair thing because he has so many exciting ones.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty clear commonality here that the better fighters in that division, they have a real hard time fighting him in any kind of an exciting way. Even the Rory MacDonald loss wasn't necessarily all that awesome a fight, and yet he bears no cost for the complexion of the fight.
Why do you think that is?
I think he's well liked, and I think the fact that he's got these other wins kind of insulates him from that. But I don't think it's much more than that. You're a well liked guy. You got a few great knockouts. They'll cover for you for a real long time.
Is it a striker bias? Basically, if he's fighting like that as a wrestler, it feels like you get a lot more hate. Like, look at the hate that Usman got.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
for some reason, people are like, they're more willing to tolerate it if it's striking, if it's a boring striking match.
Right, because he can strike at any time and end up fighting. Kind of like Lyoto Machida. Lyoto Machida has a style that has been boring in the past, but you give him the right opening. Ryan Bader, you name it. Rashad Evans. He can turn the fight around at any
Was that a boring fight in your opinion on Sunday?
I wouldn't say boring because the whole time you're kind of just waiting like, okay, when is the strike gonna land? What's happening? And there's a few openings there that kind of put you on edge. So just the fact that you're on edge, I think there's some interest in that.
You disagree, Chad?
But I wouldn't say it was.
I wasn't bored, but there's a moment in fights like that where tensity or something along those lines is a thing. Like you just start to accept that there's a caution between them. You know what I mean? Like, and it would kind of come down. There was a couple times they did swing, and it got fun in these little moments. But it's just Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I mean, he's just, he's a precision and he's a really good striker because he's reactive mostly. You know what I mean? Like he's reactive. He loves the counter, and he loves to, if you watch him too, he's always, I wouldn't say admiring his shots, but he's making sure he's doing the right shot, and he's kind of watching it through. He's not, he's not just going in there wild. So it's one of those type of things. There's a certain caution, or maybe, I don't know if it's reluctance, but there's something in there that starts to become part of the overall fight, and that's the part that people get bored with. I personally don't mind that because I know these guys are trying to size each other up, but every little wince and everything means something. It's so I like that kind of fight, but you know how this demographic can be sometimes.
Anticlimactic is what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
By the end, you were like,
well, then he dropped him in the 5th.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, there it is, and then he just couldn't do a whole lot with it. So
it
he
was
like,
pride. That would have been a very easy
thing,
fight,
right?
too.
Like,
Sure. It actually felt a lot like that. It always felt like I was never dozing off. I always felt like something could happen. But if
you would have been though if it was one of those typical fight nights that started at 10.
Oh hell yeah, yeah for sure. I mean, I'll doze off. It could be Gustafsson Jones, happening before and it's 1 a.m. and I just can't stay up. But I will say, like, it's not one of those fights if you're trying to introduce someone to MMA. This is not the fight that you're showing them to get excited. Is Darren Till the next big thing? Like, are you guys on board? Are you sold? Or is the jury still out?
He's got some work to do.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel too. I saw a couple people making that proclamation, but I still feel like I haven't seen quite enough. It was fun watching him in his hometown, though. I think that really translated for people to see him in that environment.
There's something there, right?
Yeah.
There is something there.
100%. But it's not that I don't believe it. It's that it's not like I saw something and I was like, oh, well, this is not the guy. I just didn't see something to say, oh, that is the guy.
Right. Let me ask you guys about Friday night in London. Bellator had their 200th event. We won't, lament the fact that it was via tape delay here. It aired via tape delay here in the United States.
You guys are very good not to put out the spoilers.
Yeah, well,
which I'm against, by the way.
Yes.
Put
in any event,
put out the freaking spoilers.
the main event took a hit, but in the end, it ended up being a very entertaining card, I thought, with some really impressive performances. None more so than MVP against David Rickles. To have someone break like that mentally is an incredible achievement. Gegard Mousasi finally gets that Bellator title, and he does so in very dominant fashion. Aaron Chalmers with a nice win. Phil Davis getting a knockout. Awesome. I mean, there was a lot to like on that card, so kudos to them. But the big story coming out of it was Gegard Mousasi versus Roy MacDonald. It's rare in this day and age that a quote-unquote super fight between two champions just kind of happens organically, where it's not the promoter trying to make it happen. And it seems like both fighters are on board, and it seems like the promotion is kind of like, I'm not quite sure if I want to do this right now. Now, I spoke to Scott Coker yesterday. He's currently out of the country on a sort of mini vacation, and he actually said, I'm open to it. It's a priority. We just have to figure out if the timing is right. So it's a bit of a maybe a changing of stances from what he said on Friday. That being said, they're not coming out and saying, yes, this is the fight, we're doing this. And I see both sides of the equation. I see both arguments. I'm curious what you guys think about it. Would you, if you're Bellator, are you booking this fight right off the bat, or are you waiting? I know you weighed in. Tell us how you feel, Danny.
Well, I think the fight to make is Gegard Mousasi versus 50 Cent.
Stop.
That was a very wagon.
That was here I am getting excited. I just set the whole damn table, and you come out with that crap.
No,
that is the ghost of Jeff Wagenheim
I had to
taking over your body.
That's for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
No, but I'm pretty against it. There's several reasons. Do I think Gegard Mousasi is a great fighter? Yes. Do I think Roy MacDonald is a great fighter? Do I think that would be a great fight? Yes. But there's several issues that fight sort of presents in a larger scale for the promotion.
Please tell us.
What's the main difference between Bellator and the UFC? Sure, you can go down the list. The roster is bigger in the UFC. The production, looks different, whatever. But the main thing is how the promotion is viewed. The UFC is viewed, let's be honest, more legitimate than Bellator. Having a belt in the UFC means more than having a belt in Bellator. And why is that? Because the UFC that was built around responsible, organized, and merit-based matchmaking, right? For a long time, we had a contender always going up against the champion, and that's the way it was. And that's why the UFC belt has so much weight, right? It has so much importance. With Bellator, you don't have that yet where owning a Bellator belt, of course, obviously means something, and it's definitely something anybody should be proud of, but it doesn't mean as much as it does in the UFC. And the moment you start just, okay, you want a belt, all right, let's do super fight between champions, that's the moment you start devaluing the belt. And in an era where we have interim belts, where we have fights where, oh, Conor McGregor won the belt at 145, all right, go to 155. Michael Bisping, GSP, etc. Tyron Woodley wanting to fight Nick Diaz. In that type of era, I would like for the fight to make sense. I wouldn't want just, again, and this has been Bellator's problem for a while, just cobble together fights, this big name versus this big name. No, have them defend the belt a few times. Have them pick up steam, have the fight make sense. Have the fight be that this is clearly the best middleweight, that there's nobody else out there that can beat him, that this is the best welterweight, that there's nobody else that can beat him in Bellator. And then it makes sense. Have them fight. It doesn't have to be, they don't have to go on a 5-fight win streak
But do Gary Mousasi and Roy MacDonald need to pick up steam? They're already
big names, but like
they're already established stars.
They are really established fights. But I think the moment you start picking and choosing and just throwing out there and then not really caring about the belt and defending the belt, I think that's an issue.
I kind of see it almost just the opposite because I feel like Bellator is the most reluctant promotion in striking while the iron is hot. I don't know why this is, but for whatever reason, when they've got something that people want and they covet, like maybe the MVP versus
Paul Daly.
Paul Daly, you get this perfect stuff and they don't do it, and you're like, whoa. Yeah, I mean, I know it worked out that we got this cool fight with Rickles and this thing happens, but this is that one moment where you're kind of like, okay, these two guys, for whatever reason, I never contemplated this fight in the UFC. They weren't in the same weight class. But they have a very similar mentality. They're both chirping at each other, and I'm like, man, they both already have names. I think that one of them could be. I think Rory MacDonald's the best free agent they've ever picked up, and then Gegard Mousasi's got to be right in that conversation too. Right. So it's like you're putting those two guys together in this partition down fight that's just going to bring the, it's going to bring you eyeballs. Any UFC fan who's not paying attention to that, like I don't know what you're watching. What are you waiting for? So. There's a part of me that's just like, hey, Bellator, why mess around? One of these guys screws up, you never get that fight. Yeah. I would rather see it now while the iron is hot.
I'm actually on Danny's side on this one.
So it's 2-2?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I haven't weighed in.
Oh, I know which way you're going to go.
Yeah, the sensible way.
There's no mystery to this at all. I mean, look, it's not that I hate it or something like that. It's not. If they made it, it'd be fine. It'd be great.
Yeah. It's a good fight.
And look, if Rory wins, my God, this is momentous. I certainly agree. I'm not like super against or anything like that. But for me, it doesn't do a whole lot. Like to me, it doesn't feel like BJ Penn St. Pierre for a lot of reasons. BJ Penn had already beaten Matt Hughes before he fought St. Pierre the first time.
But who's comparing it to that?
Hold on, let me make a point.
All right.
And St. Pierre, I mean, BJ Penn gave him the business in that fight. He lost, but he roughed up St. Pierre. By the time the second one came around, he had a little bit of what Danny was talking about, where there was a little bit of imagination. You look at this matchup, what are Rory and Mousasi good at? Basically the exact same things. The only difference is that now you have a weight differential. That was not the case with St. Pierre and Penn. There was this notion that Penn had this invincibility that could only be countered by a magical skill set and maybe also weight. He also had ventured off and fought Renzo and Rodrigo Gracie. To me, it's like, if you want to do it, cool. I mean, I'm not going to complain about it, but there's not a lot of mystery to me. 9 times out of 10, Mousasi should win that fight, and if he doesn't, that would be a bit of a scandal.
Let me ask you guys this. If you're not booking that fight, who makes sense for Rory and Mousasi next?
Let's think about this. I don't know anything about Bellator's middleweight roster. I'm not their matchmaker.
We're done.
I'm not their matchmaker.
All right, the argument's over. The argument's over.
First of all, he can fight at 205.
What about
Mousasi?
What about King Mo, who said he was going to drop to 185?
King Mo, who just got knocked down in 12 seconds?
Yeah,
Get out of here.
At heavyweight.
Get out of here. Heavyweight against a light heavyweight.
First of all, 15. Number
okay,
one.
I'm sorry. Come on. By the way, we saw that fight already. It wasn't the greatest fight of all time. It was on CBS.
It's different era. He can wrestle now.
Sure.
I think at one point I'd like to see a Shlemenko fight again.
Yeah, at one point. Doing this fight is not the end of their careers. They're both riding winning streaks now. They both look really good. They're both the 2 best signings they've ever had.
Here's the thing. Y'all are presenting this like it's the best option on paper, and I'm not saying it's not. Okay, but then be realistic about what's going to happen.
What?
The overwhelming likelihood is that it's going to be fairly lackluster because the weight will be the differential there.
Okay, here's the other thing.
What's one of the most enticing points? We've talked about how the middleweight champion at Bellator, you could make a case for him that he could be the best.
Yeah, and the welterweight champion.
Yeah, and the same thing for the welterweight champion. If you pit them against each other, one of them has to lose.
So what?
I mean, there's still something there. Have them win.
I'm less concerned about that.
Have them feel great. Have them feel like the champions. Because right now
they do feel like the champions. That's why they're calling each other out. Now they have a reason to actually call. Now the fight actually makes sense.
For me,
they were talking about each other when they both signed. Now they both have belts, and they're saying, "Look, let's just see who's the top dog in Bellator.
It just
this
feels
is a
like
fight to see who's the best fighter in Bellator. In my
Bellator
opinion.
feels like,
worked
in a
up
way,
thinking
like
about
If they pitch it like that, it's interesting. That's interesting way
right?
to pitch it.
I mean,
it kind of feels like the MLS where like these legends just go on and it's just you know.
but this isn't the case.
Is it Zlatan
This isn't
versus
the case.
Wayne Rooney or
You're
something?
telling me Gegard
yeah, it's
Mousasi
like-
can't beat Whitaker or Romero? You're telling me that Rory can't beat Woodley, which he did,
Yeah,
or Covington
yeah,
or
for
RDA?
sure.
So why not have them fight each other? This is the first time that Bellator can say, we have a main event and we have champions that are better than the UFC.
Let me ask you this: why do you think Coker is hesitant?
I think partially for those reasons, like let's build them up, let's keep them separate, let's not make them lose.
Old school thinking.
But here's the thing, with all due respect to those belts, they mean nothing in Bellator.
Wow.
They don't mean anything. Do you think that they do?
Why,
I think they
do you
mean
think
a
it?
little
Do you think
something.
it helps as far as the meaning? Just have
Them holding
big,
the belt
have big
actually
names just fighting.
It's the
whenever they
difference.
want.
Like if Colby Covington wins the UFC welterweight title, he is now branded as a champion, right? He has now held the belt that the likes of GSP has held. Roy
You mean
MacDonald.
if he beats Woodley or something?
Well, if he's beating RDA to a degree, right? He could walk around with the belt, he'll parade. Rory winning the belt, Rory holding on to that title gives the title legitimacy, not the opposite, right? Mousasi beating Carvalho now gives that belt legitimacy, not the opposite. So they've already done their work with the belt. Now put them together. Now even do it at a catchweight. Who cares? I mean, it's nice that Rory becomes, a middleweight champion, but I just want to see those guys fight. They want to fight each other. The fans seem to want it for the most part. Who freaking cares? And the easiest response to all of this is there's no one waiting in the wings. I heard from Rafael Lovato, and they're like, we love that fight. But come on.
just have them. I feel like look.
What?
Lovato can win that fight.
Absolutely, but what is that going to do as far as any kind of buzz, business? Like, there's no one clamoring for that. I don't even remember who Lovato just beat. Who? Gerald Harris.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? It's like
One of the nastiest arm bars you'll ever see.
absolutely. I'm just saying, build. It also buys you time. It also allows a queue to form at 170. It allows a queue to form at 185. To me, it's like the no-brainer. It's a bigger no-brainer than MVP Daily, which I thought was the no-brainer of all no-brainers.
That's the one I really want to see.
Oh yeah, 100%. I just don't feel like there's a downside here. If the guy
I
loses,
think
he
the
comes
fight could
back.
end up just being quite lackluster, to be
Is
honest
that?
with
I
you.
mean, that's a very valid downside. If you think that the fight is a stinker, then what's the point?
Stinker, no, but like, just not much mystery to me. It's like this dude's really skilled in everything. This dude's really skilled in everything. He's naturally bigger. He's actually fought 2 weight classes up. I know how this movie probably is going to
The
end.
truth is, with Bellator right now, they should be in the business of putting on the best fights possible. Like,
But a lot
forget
of-
about the fact of trying to build up this, that, or the other. You just need to steal headlines and get people talking. That's why Chael Sonnen is fighting Fedor Emelianenko.
Well,
you know
Chael
what I
is
mean?
fighting Fedor Emelianenko. It wasn't just a fight that it was booked, like, because a lot of that Bellator is doing is just pitting up big names against each other. Tito Ortiz, Stephan Bonner, just throwing big names
This
out
is not
there to
Tito
create
Ortiz,
buzz.
Stephan Bonner. This is not even
Of
close
course,
to that.
it's different, but in the same in the sense of that these two have big names and they're very skilled. Let's just put them up against each other.
But there's a story there. They're both champions. They've been talking about each other before they became champion in Bellator.
I have issues with a champion winning the belt and immediately going up
There is no meritocracy in the Bellator weight class.
because it's not built. Because they haven't created a system. They don't have a system where the champion fights the number one contender.
So if they both defend the title once, that's okay?
I think if they defend it a couple times and we're having this
Couple times now.
conversation,
Jeez
one or two
Louise.
fights, and we're having this.
We're talking 2 years now, a couple times.
But by next year around this time, they could have defended the title twice.
Rory has fought once in the past year. They don't give the guy fights. Mousasi too hasn't fought all that much.
You don't need another Brett premise. You know what I mean? Like, what are those moments? You know what I'm talking about? They try to set
Yes.
him up, and then all of a sudden, everything
To
is...
me, the fight doesn't make sense. I kind of compared it to the situation of Anderson Silva versus GSP. They were both amazing fighters, and different sizes as well. But people didn't want to watch that fight just because they were two great fighters. Oh, let's see this great matchup. It was because they were both so dominant in their weight class that it's like, okay, there's really nobody else left. We saw what they did against guys, in their own weight class. Let's see what they do against each other. And that was a lot of the charm and why that fight was so attractive. It never came down and it never went down. But I think, it's clear that Mousasi will likely hold the belt for a while. It's clear that Roy will likely hold the belt for a while. Have him defend it a couple of times. Have it establish some order. Something the UFC lacks a little
Way
bit
too
of these days.
conservative.
And then make the fight down the line.
The same promotion that is doing a heavyweight tournament involving half of it non-heavyweights is going to all of a sudden start to care about their weight classes and meritocracy when they have this fight that
they
makes
should,
all the sense.
or else they'd be a version of the UFC, but with a smaller roster, with less star power. Let the belt mean something. Let us defend the belt.
I will say that both those guys are probably at the height of not just winning and all that, but of their personalities coming across. Mousasi has steadily become like this strange. He's a very diehards kind of, diehards are going to know who he is, but he has a kind of cult vibe to him now. Like I feel like people really do. And same with Rory MacDonald. So if you put them together, and they could do all kinds of lead-up shows and things like that, and I think they'd be pretty interesting. You know what I mean?
You could also make a case that Mousasi has never been better. Right? I mean,
that's true.
And this guy's been around for a very long time.
Yeah, other than the Hall getting caught, right? Like his streak would be ridiculous.
And after that,
and also the Shlemenko, he got a little lucky with that. But nevertheless, look, he showed up. Fights are tough, and even the guys you think you can beat, you can have a tough moment, and he persevered. So
the good news is that for the first time, I think in their history, there's like Bader, Mousasi, Rory. There was a time, remember we were talking not that long ago about, man, their free agent signings just aren't right. They're not living up to what Benson. Like these signings just weren't working out for them, and all of a sudden now you've got those three guys, and those are pretty damn good champions. Yeah. Like you can make a case. I know Cormier would disagree, but like you can make a case that all three of those guys could very well be UFC champions right now, right? And they've never had. Chandler, like these were arguments and maybe a little bit of stretches at a time, Eddie Alvarez, but these guys are proven commodities in that other league. So I think that's a big deal for Bellator right now. All right, so what are we going to do now? We're going to go to After the Beat. We're going to go to Twitter exclusively. So if you're watching us on Twitter, stay right there. If you're not watching us on Twitter, if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, MMA Fighting, if you're illegally streaming us on Twitch, I don't know if you can actually do that, but if you're watching us on any other platform, go to live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting. Right now, we're going to answer your questions for the next 30 minutes or so. There's some good ones, so go live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting. After the Beat starts right now.